In August of 2022, 8 people in Shreveport, Louisiana were arrested on counts of prostitution and human trafficking.
In 2021, there were 932 confirmed and suspected victims in just the state of Louisiana, and 16,658 victims of trafficking were identified in the United States.
Since the pandemic began, trafficking and sexual exploitation have skyrocketed in my own home state of Missouri and across the United States of America and the world.
Human trafficking is a major problem nationwide, and lawmakers aren't doing enough to prevent it.
Human trafficking is a $150 billion criminal industry that exploits vulnerable individuals and strips them of their fundamental human rights.
Human trafficking is defined by the Department of Homeland Security as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act, which is also known as sex trafficking.
An average of 72% of human trafficking each year is categorized as sex trafficking, and 79% of sex trafficking involves girls or women. 37% of trafficking involves children under the age of 18.
Trafficking occurs in every state, in every district, and in every city.
Human trafficking is reported in cities, suburbs, and rural areas in all 50 states in this nation.
Human trafficking affects millions of people worldwide each year, and it's a serious problem in the US with numerous implications for people everywhere.
In law enforcement, I see several effects of human trafficking, from breakdown of family units to mental health issues, sociological or socioeconomic issues, and just crime in general. There's a lot of impact just in everyone's community, and it doesn't just affect the people involved. It affects everybody.
So how do we prevent this?
There are two major factors pertaining to the spread of sex trafficking: the people running the operation and the people purchasing the services. The latter, known as Johns, are prosecuted the least compared to traffickers or other individuals managing the system.
Sex trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry fueled by the buyers. It's all about supply and demand.
One of the issues that we see with human trafficking is supply and demand. So there is a constant supply whenever it comes to the human body. And so if there's a demand, there's going to be that supply.
The traffickers supply the victims, and the Johns buy services with the victims. If the Johns were more heavily prosecuted, then the demand would go down, and not as many victims would be hurt through trafficking.
Of the 10 U.S. laws specifically addressing human trafficking, only one discusses prevention of the crime. Most legislation surrounding human trafficking focuses more on the protection of the victims after the fact rather than the perpetrators of the crime.
Many times we focus on pimps or even the madam or the bottom bee, the person who's recruiting and grooming these girls. But the Johns are just as much as at fault, especially when we work with juveniles. They cannot consent to any type of sexual act. And so Johns should be held accountable for the actions that they take with these juveniles.
Johns are rarely considered into criminal prosecution. Not only are Johns very unlikely to be arrested in the first place, as they are seldom exposed by victims and almost never by traffickers, they are much less likely to be found guilty because they're not always what you might expect.
Johns can be anywhere from 18 to 99 years old. They can be lawmakers, they can be government officials, they can be businessmen, they can be fathers, they can be men who live on the street or homeless.
A news article with Assistant District Attorney Connie Jordan says, "They're not outwardly seedy, slimy men who you look at and say, oh yeah, he's patronizing prostitutes. It's the same type of people who have child pornography on their computer. Johns can be anyone, even prominent or successful members of the community."
If we could ensure further, equal prosecution of the Johns, then we could stop the problem at its source.
If we would approach it as trying to cut off demand also, and approach it from both aspects rather than just go in from one angle. If we go from both angles, we could eliminate a problem that we have. If we don't have people trying to purchase the human trafficking victims, then it would be easier to locate the ones that are supplying in return.
Despite the massive problem the human trafficking industry has become in the US, it has very little media coverage. Which is understandable, since by nature it's an uncomfortable subject to broadcast on the 6 o'clock news. But it must be brought to attention if we're going to effectively address it.
Human trafficking is not a Republican or Democrat issue. It is an American issue. It is a human issue.
Human trafficking is a serious problem that lawmakers need to better address. If we want to stop this horrific crime, we need to take action, and we need to take action now.